me have a just common word of introduction. So, Professor Kiran, as you may be knowing by now, he's assistant professor at IMJV Hyderabad, and as he mentioned just now, he did his PhD from Texas Tech, and he works two areas in where he's working. Actually, one is a B2B marketing, and the second one is innovation in creativity. So, as he was saying, this year he won the Sparry K Best Dissertation Award in the AMS, Annual Marketing Science Conference in Vancouver. And I was there actually. I was fortunate to attend that presentation event, so I'm aware of that work. So he's going to present the same work.
Yes.
He has two papers. One, of course, the consequences of international joint ventures, marketing joint ventures, and he has another work where he's looking at antecedents of the international marketing joint ventures. So over to him. So you have roughly, as we discussed, at about 40-45 minutes,
sure,
and then remaining time for Q&A. And he has slight preference for questions to be asked in the later part of the presentation or once he's through it. But just in case there is any pressing question which you think is inhibiting your understanding of his work, then you can give
so the clarification questions and all can be asked. But thank you very much, Anand. I really appreciate it. So my name is Kiran. I am an assistant professor of marketing at the Indian School of Business. And first of all, I'd like to thank IMA and also Anand for giving me this opportunity to come here and present my work. And I'm really honored to be here, to be at the most prestigious business school in India. So coming to my research, as I mentioned, I started this project in the first year of my PhD. Before that I was working in corporate strategy, and I worked in ISB only as a teaching and research assistant for 3 years. So after I joined the PhD program, I wanted to work on something that I'm really interested in and where I have some understanding and all. So I worked on a lot of joint ventures and mergers, etc. when I was working in the corporate. So I wanted to take that topic as the topic of interest. And so that's how this project has started. And it was my first year paper. And this is looking at the consequences of international marketing joint venture dissolutions. And my second year paper was on the antecedents actually. So because I needed more data to run a survival analysis, you need the data on both died and surviving joint ventures. So that's why it took a little bit more time. So that became my second year paper. So, and these two essentially became my 2 essays of dissertation. So the topic for today's talk is the effects of international marketing joint venture dissolution on the shareholder value of the emerging market partner firm. And this is a joint work with my co-advisors, Venkish Shankar from Texas A&M University and Mayuk Das from Texas Tech University. That's where I graduated from. So coming to the construct, international marketing joint venture. So we define it as a form of marketing alliance which is formalized between 2 or more firms from different countries. We call them international marketing joint ventures because they predominantly focus on downstream value chain activities such as sales, distribution, customer relationship management, etc. So KPMG has conducted a survey of about 100 CEOs in the US in 2014, and the survey results suggest that majority of the CEOs are looking at the emerging market expansion as a primary strategic focus. So therefore, several developed market firms have been increasingly forming international marketing joint ventures with emerging market firms from India and China. And if you look at these kind of joint ventures, in these joint ventures, the developed market firm, it brings technology and global brands, and in general they have deep pockets. And coming to the emerging market firms, they bring local market knowledge and strong distribution network in their markets. So for example, if you take Hero Honda, it was started in 1984 when Honda wanted to enter the Indian motorcycle market. Okay. So when they were looking at an alliance, okay, they found Hero. By that time, it was a bicycle manufacturing company, but it had a very strong distribution network in India, and it also had local market knowledge. And Honda at the time was a global brand in automobiles, and at the same time, it also built technology. It's known for its technology. And in 1984, this alliance was formed, and it ran for about 26 years. And for interpartner conflict reasons, in 2010, the joint venture was dissolved. So in general, when a joint venture is dissolving, two things essentially happens. One is one of the partners may acquire the equity shares of the other partner, or in very few cases, the partners, one of the partners sells its stake to a third party firm, essentially. Right? In this particular case, Hero acquired the remaining 20% stake of Honda. So what happened? The market reacted negatively to this particular dissolution announcement. In another case, Britannia and Fonterra, this joint venture was formed in 2002 to distribute cheese products in India. Okay, so Britannia's cheese products in India, and in 2009 this alliance was dissolved when Britannia acquired the remaining 49% stake of Fonterra. Market reacted positively to this particular announcement. In another case, Mahindra Renault, it was actually established in 2005 for sales and distribution. Renault, the Mahindra cars, it was a flop car anyway. Logan, I think, it was, Mahindra and Renault. And in 2010, this joint venture was dissolved when Mahindra acquired the remaining 49% stake of Renault. And market responded negatively to this announcement. In another case, Godrej and Hershey. Okay, again, it was a distribution of confectionery products in India. This alliance was formed in 2007, and after 5 years, it was dissolved when Hershey, the developed market firm, acquired 49% remaining stakes of Godrej, right? And market responded positively to this particular announcement. So we were actually intrigued by this particular phenomenon, and we wanted to study. Okay, so what actually happens to the emerging market firm after a joint venture dissolution announcement, especially to its shareholder value? So, and we started looking at the literature on joint ventures and alliances. And we found a lot of literature on alliance and joint venture formation, okay? But we found very few studies focusing on alliance and joint venture dissolutions, and especially in the joint ventures between two developed market firms context, okay? And when I was thinking about it, so why there are not many studies looking at joint venture dissolution is because of the lack of availability of organized data. So when it comes to formations, you have some databases such as DC Platinum, from where you can get a lot of information on alliance formations, etc. But when it comes to dissolutions, it becomes all the more difficult to get data on joint venture dissolutions. So therefore, we found that there is a limited knowledge available on this particular topic, even when it comes to a joint venture between two developed market firms. However, if you look at these joint ventures between developed and emerging market firms, so research suggests that 60 to 70% of these joint ventures dissolve in about 4 years of time. So therefore, we wanted to actually look at this particular issue and study the joint ventures that are dissolved between a developed and an emerging market firm. And specifically, we look at two questions. One is, what is the impact of IMJV dissolution announcement on the emerging market firms' shareholder value. And we also look at what are the drivers of the shareholder value for the emerging market firms in these kind of situations like dissolution announcements. Okay, so we rely on the real options view of joint ventures. Real options view suggests that firms use these joint ventures to enter unfamiliar and also risky product markets and also geographical areas. So the reason behind this particular kind of mode of entry is that firms can use these joint ventures to capture the upside potential when things become favorable, and they eventually acquire the joint venture going forward. When they think that okay, things are favorable, now the uncertainty is cleared, so now we can acquire and actually expand, right? So that's what has happened in the cases that I was talking about. So therefore, at the time of the dissolution, what happens is that in most of the cases, one of the partner firms exercise the real option of acquiring the joint venture from the other partner. So what are the advantages to the acquiring partner, okay, when they are actually acquiring the joint venture is that one thing is that you have learned something from this joint venture already. You know how the joint venture works, etc. So you have the opportunities to leverage the learning and resources, okay, that you already created for future growth. And at the same time, you are also taking advantage of the favorable environmental conditions, okay, before somebody else will come and take the advantage of it, right? So therefore, building on real options view, what we hypothesize is that if the emerging market firm is going to acquire the joint venture after the dissolution, it's going to create a positive value to the emerging market firms because of the reason that it's acquiring for the future growth and expansion, and at the same time it can take advantage of the favorable conditions in the market. And we also look at several moderators which are both the emerging market firm related as well as the joint venture related. When it comes to emerging market firm, so the emerging market firm's equity share in the joint venture. If the emerging market firm has a higher equity share in the joint venture, it exercises more control on the joint venture. When it has more control on the joint venture, it must have learned more from this particular joint venture, and also it can leverage the joint venture resources much better for future growth. So therefore, we expect that the emerging market firm's equity strengthens the relationship between the emerging market firm's acquisition decision and the emerging market firm's shareholder value due to the dissolution announcement. And we also looked at the emerging market firm's prior alliance experience. If the emerging market firm has managed several alliances earlier, okay, these kind of alliances, the emerging market firm must have learned enough about how to manage these alliances, etc. So I think emerging market firms with higher alliance experience can gain more when they want to acquire the joint venture after the dissolution announcement. Therefore, we expect that emerging market firms' prior alliance experience strengthens the relationship between emerging market firms acquiring the joint venture and its shareholder value due to the announcement. So now coming to the joint venture factors, how well the joint venture is doing at the time of the dissolution, the financial performance. If the joint venture is doing very well, okay, it has the potential to create more value to the emerging market firm if it wants to acquire the joint venture after the dissolution announcement, right? So therefore, we expect that the financial performance of the joint venture at the time of dissolution positively moderate the relationship between the emerging market firm acquisition decision and its shareholder value. And we also looked at the reason for dissolution. So what has actually led to this particular dissolution? If you look at Hero Honda, the inter-partner conflict was the reason. So it was an internal reason. So, and there might be reasons that are because of external reasons also. For example, if you look at emerging markets, studies suggest that emerging market joint ventures are dissolved more due to the external reasons rather than internal environmental reasons such as inter-partner conflict, etc. So we want to look at the future. If the reason is external, for example, future uncertainty. It may be related to, for example, the market is not doing well. There is a lot of competition, okay, and the market is very uncertain, okay. So in such kind of cases, so if the future is uncertain and the emerging market firm wants to acquire the joint venture, it might actually negatively affect the shareholder value. Therefore, we hypothesize that future uncertainty weakens the relationship between the emerging market firm's acquisition decision and the shareholder value.
So this is future uncertainty in the home market or the host market?
Home market, yeah. So in the emerging market, so all these joint ventures are formed between developed and emerging market firms in emerging markets. So the context is India, essentially. Indian firms and other developed market firms, essentially. These joint ventures are formed in India. So, so all the cases that I have shown you are part of my data set, essentially. Right? So, and we also looked at, so one of the differences I was mentioning between developed and emerging market firms when it comes to these joint ventures is that developed market firms bring technology and the emerging market firms bring local market knowledge and distribution network, right? So if there is a lot of emphasis on products and technology in the joint venture, okay, and the emerging market and the developed market firm is leaving the joint venture and the emerging market firm is acquiring it, right? And it might actually negatively moderate the relationship between the emerging market firm acquisition and its effects on the shareholder value, right? So this is essentially our conceptual model. So we test this using data collected from multiple sources. We also control for several firm-specific, industry-specific factors. Yeah.
Quick clarification question. So, apart from the fact that emerging market is based, firms are based in India, developed market firms are based probably in US and Europe, is there any like firm level differences? One thing you said was, okay, local knowledge, technology, but apart from that, how is an emerging market firm different from a regular firm or a developed?
Yeah, that's a very good question actually. So when it comes to so if you are looking at the institutional context, right? So according to Shade 2011, the institutional context of emerging markets are significantly different from that of developed markets,
so,
right?
Like
so
in the context of your paper?
Yeah, in the context of my paper, I'm only looking at mostly the organizational level differences. For example, especially in terms of resource differences, right? So what resources the developed market firm is bringing to this joint venture? What resources the emerging market firm is bringing to this joint venture? I'm not actually looking at the differences in terms of culture and other aspects, essentially. Does it make sense? Yes. So these differences, yeah, these are essentially resource differences. So to these joint ventures, what the developed market is bringing, what the emerging market is bringing, right?
And those tend to be the same. Like generally, these are the things which develop.
Yeah, in general, when it comes to resources, yes. Okay. Yeah, in general, research suggests that developed market firms, you expect them to bring technology and brands. Right. The emerging market firms, you expect them to bring local market knowledge and distribution network, essentially, right? Okay. And other things are like, so for example, human resource, local human resource, etc., right? Okay, so this is the conceptual model. So coming to the data, yeah.
So when you say dissolution, is either of these cases, either emerging market firm acquiring the stake or the developed market, or the emerging market firm acquiring the stake?
Yeah. So this is a dummy variable essentially. So I'm focusing. So I created two dummies essentially. One is the emerging market firm acquiring or developed market firm acquiring. The other one is whether third party acquiring or the developed market firm acquiring. So developed market firm I created as the base variable.
Okay.
So that's how I looked at it. So when we are looking at the results, we are actually comparing to the developed market firm acquisition. So when compared to developed market firm acquiring the joint venture, if the emerging market firm acquires it, it has a positive or negative effect essentially, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah,
sure. So coming to the data collection process, as I mentioned that there are no data sources, organized sources available when it comes to joint venture dissolutions, it has been quite intensive, I would say. So we spent a lot of time, about like 1.5 years, just to collect data. First of all, to identify the dissolutions, okay, what joint ventures were dissolved, and to get data for each variable that I was talking about. It took a lot of time. So first, we started with identifying what are the joint ventures that are dissolved in India, especially that are formed between Indian and other developed market firms, right? So we have used, so now this particular database is called as EMIS, so Emerging Market Information System or something like services or something like that. So, but earlier it used to be called as ISI Emerging Markets. So what ISI Emerging Markets provides us is that it gives you news information about especially emerging market countries, India, China, Brazil, Russia, etc. Right? And we also used STC Platinum a little bit. If there are US firms, so they are talking about formations of joint ventures in India. So we take the data and see whether they were dissolved or not, etc. essentially, right? So we used such terms in ISI emerging markets like terminate, dissolve, exit, and several other such terms. And we identified news releases with the dissolution announcements. And finally, we could get 160 dissolutions, okay, usable dissolutions between 2001 to 2016. So we collected the dissolution event dates when the dissolution was announced. And we also collected from the the announcements, we collected the equity shares of each firm, okay, and if the reason was mentioned why it was actually dissolved, and what is going to be the post-dissolution structure, which partner is going to acquire the joint venture after the dissolution, etc. So these are some of the sample announcements, okay, that we have used for this data analysis. Okay, and on top of it, we have, yeah. Sure.
How long did these last, typically, these JVs?
Yeah, so the average dissolution, the average tenure of these joint venture was about 5 years. Yeah, right. So we have actually used a machine learning technique called natural language processing to do topic modeling of all these announcements, to understand what latent topics will emerge from these announcements. Okay, so what we understood is that there are 3 topics, okay, that were repeatedly emerged from the topic modeling. Is that one topic emphasizing on equity, okay, essentially, and another topic emphasizing on services, okay, and the other topic emphasizing on products. So what we have done is we have actually included these topics as controls in the main model, and so on top of it, we also used a technique, a tool called LIWC, okay, to do the sentiment analysis, essentially to look at the degree of positive and negative emotions in that particular announcement. So whether that has any impact on the shareholder value, etc. So we controlled for the positive and negative sentiments in the announcements also. So coming to the dependent variable, our dependent variable is the shareholder value, and we measure it using cumulative abnormal returns, the classic 4-factor model to measure cumulative abnormal returns we used. And I'm thankful to IIM Ahmedabad in a way that, so in general, we don't have access to the momentum factors on the Eventus database, etc. So IIM Ahmedabad professors and finance professors have actually created these momentum factors for us. So it made our job all the more easier to get the momentum factors data from IIM Ahmedabad and use them for the cumulative abnormal returns. That's how this particular process becomes more sophisticated. Otherwise, we would have been using a simple market model without considering the momentum factors. Okay, so that's still fine, but it's not very precise. But when you add the momentum 4 factors, so then the analysis becomes much more precise. So in that sense, the IMJV, the data that they created was quite helpful. Okay. So we have looked at the significances of different event windows, and we have used the most significant event window, -3.1, for our data analysis.
Could you just, you're explaining those MPS and
yeah. So yeah, so you want to
yes, what are those terms there?
yeah, so these are like, you know, these are the factors from the so how the small firms, medium firms, small cap firms, okay, are doing in the market. So you control for those factors also, so that you know, you will get a much more precise estimates of the cumulative abnormal returns. So that's what. So otherwise, in the market model, in the basic market model, what you are so the abnormal return is nothing but what is the expected return and what is the actual return. So it's the difference between the expected return and the actual return. If the difference is positive, okay, that means it has created positive value. If the difference is negative, it created negative value. So, but to make sure that it is more precise, you add the momentum factor. So if you want to talk about it, so we can actually discuss here. Sure. Yeah. So. And coming to the independent variable, so I'm going to talk about the measures of the key independent variable. As I mentioned, the proposed post-dissolution structure, whether the emerging market firm is acquiring or the third party is acquiring. So because the developed market firm acquiring, I created it as a dummy. So that's a dummy variable. And the emerging market firm's equity is nothing but the percentage value of the equity of the emerging market firm in the joint venture. And alliance experience is also the number of alliances that the emerging market firm had before this particular joint venture. And the financial performance, it was very difficult, so we could not get an objective measure of financial performance. However, in the announcements, it was mentioned whether it was a profit-making or loss-making alliance. So we have used that as a dummy variable to measure the financial performance. Future uncertainty is it's a dummy variable, whether the announcement has mentioned about the future uncertainty, for example, competition, business is not performing well, etc., or not. And product emphasis is from the NLP that we got. The number of times product is mentioned in the announcement, we took it as the emphasis on product in this particular joint venture, right? So these are the different sources of data. So given that this data was created from multiple sources, it took a lot of time. So sometimes to get data for one particular variable, it took 3 months, etc., right? So because you have to go through all the annual reports and count the number of alliances that the firm has done. In some cases, the annual report don't mention, you call the company and see how many alliances that they have done before this. So I have another paper that is published in JAMS. It's on international marketing alliances. It's a theory of international marketing alliances in emerging markets, essentially. So where we interviewed 106 senior executives who were involved in these alliances, essentially, to understand more about what are the antecedents and consequences of these alliances, essentially both formations and dissolutions. So historical price data, we got it from Capital and Pros, but as I mentioned, the form-of-inch factors we got from IMM, so a paper that we cite in our paper, so that is from a working paper from IMJV, finance professors, essentially, right? So what's the impact of these dissolutions on emerging market firms' value? What do you expect? Whether it is positive or negative. So when a joint venture is dissolved in an emerging market, so how might it impact the shareholder value of that firm, the partner firm? What's your
It should
expectation?
impact favorably.
Huh?
It should impact favorably.
It should impact favorably, right? So, what we understood is that the emerging market firms realizes 3% increase in its returns after the joint venture dissolution announcement. And the percentage of the joint ventures that had positive returns was 64%. And negative is 36%. And coming to the main model estimation, the conceptual model estimation, controlling for potential endogeneity issues. So we have used a control function approach where we have regressed the cumulative abnormal returns on all the independent variables and control variables plus the residuals of these endogeneity corrections. Okay, so this is our final estimation model. And coming to the results, okay, I want to talk about the main results, the main effect and also the moderating effects. So our initial hypothesis is that if the emerging market firm is acquiring the joint venture after the dissolution, it has a positive impact on its shareholder value. However, we find that if the emerging market firm is acquiring the joint venture, it creates negative value to the emerging market firm. So this can again be explained by the differences, resource differences that I'm talking about between emerging markets and firms and the developed market firms, right? So developed market firms bring technology and global brands, and the emerging market firms bring local market knowledge and distribution networks. So when the developed market firm is leaving the joint venture and the emerging market firm is acquiring the joint venture, the market may perceive that it's losing its technology and global brand. Okay, so I think that is the reason behind the negative impact on the shareholder value after the announcement, right? However, if the emerging market firm is acquiring, if the emerging market firm which has higher prior alliance experience, if it is acquiring, it actually creates a positive shareholder value. So the negative value that is created can be taken care by having higher alliance experience, right? So we also, as hypothesized, we found positive moderation between emerging market firms acquisition decision and its equity share. If it has a higher equity share and if it is acquiring the joint venture, it creates a positive value to the emerging market firm. And we also, as hypothesized, we found that if the if the joint venture is doing very well, financially performing well, and the emerging market firm wants to acquire, and in such cases also, it creates positive value to the emerging market firm. However, what we found is that if the emerging market firm is acquiring the joint venture because of reasons such as future uncertainty, it creates positive value to the emerging market firm. It's a little bit counterintuitive. So one potential reasons could be that according to real options views, developed market firms tend to prefer joint ventures as an option to enter international markets because it helps them to kind of do a stage-wise investment. Okay, so once the uncertainty is cleared, when the market is favorable, so then they can actually go ahead and acquire the joint venture and completely expand into the new market, right? So in this particular case, when the future uncertainty is higher, so what we are saying that if emerging market firm is acquiring when compared to developed market, it is creating positive value. So that makes sense to see a positive moderation here, right? So when compared to developed market firm, if the emerging market firm is acquiring the joint venture under conditions of future uncertainty, it creates positive value to the emerging market firm, right? So, and coming to the product emphasis, as hypothesized, we found a negative effect. Yeah.
So I'm assuming you've taken into consideration only the acquisitions where one of the emerging market has actually acquired the firm. There could be external acquisitions as well, right? So both the firms have been acquired by some third party. So this is, your data looks at only...
Yeah, so data looks at, so I did not find those cases at all, okay? So I found a few cases of a third party acquiring the shares of one of the partners. So the cases where a third party acquires totally the joint venture was, I did not find them, at least in my data set, but in general also, I think those are like very rare, right? Or a joint venture completely ceasing off is also kind of very rare, essentially.
And what will be the effect of the conglomerate on the firm? Like it could be the case where the acquisition is happening at the conglomerate.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So in most of the cases where the joint venture is formed between two firms, for example, although a firm is related to the conglomerate, Tata Motors, okay, but still it is between Tata Motor and another independent firm. However, coming to your question, so we have controlled for that factor whether the company is a part of a conglomerate or an independent firm. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
So how many samples, how many, and what is for how many international joint ventures you have in your data?
160.
160
joint ventures, yeah, essentially. And these joint ventures, joint venture dissolutions. So this is like, first of all, it is like a funnel, right? So joint ventures formed, okay, between two developed market firms. Let's say if you are looking at US and other Japanese. So, but you are looking at joint venture that first formed between a developed market firm and an Indian firm, then dissolved, right? So I think it becomes all the more difficult to get many number of joint ventures. So to get 160 itself, it was like very challenging.
So just related question. So I think we discussed this earlier also. That this, when you say alliances or joint venture in general versus marketing, international marketing joint ventures, So you're saying downstream activities, developed market firm is actually collaborating with or joining hand with the emerging market, but at the same time you're saying that they are bringing the developed market firm is bringing technology and that's the contribution. So how is this different from marketing joint ventures and joint ventures in general?
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, joint ventures in general, if you look at, so there can be joint ventures that are formed for just, I would say, operations purposes, okay? For example, cost reduction, okay? Versus joint ventures. So when it comes to marketing, downstream activities, predominantly downstream activities, but other aspects like new product development can also be considered marketing. So therefore I included the joint ventures that focused on developing a new product using a technology, etc. For example, when it comes to India, Hero Honda developing new motorcycles for the Indian market, etc. So when I'm saying predominantly, if you look at my data set, so joint ventures that are formed for when we talk about downstream activities, especially distribution and customer relationship, I get your point, but so the definition is slightly broader than just sticking to the downstream activities.
Excluded the other non-marketing joint
Yes,
ventures?
absolutely. So I don't have joint ventures that were formed, for example, there may be a joint venture between an American firm and Indian pharmaceutical firm, and the Indian pharmaceutical firm is actually producing something, okay, nothing to do with the Indian market and all, okay, so they are actually producing in and giving it back. So this is mostly a cost reduction kind of joint venture, or if it is just a manufacturing joint venture, it doesn't have anything to do with coming up with new products or like anything else. So I have excluded all those joint ventures essentially, right? Yeah, please.
So coming to from the same question, see, a particular alliance or a JV might have multiple motives at the same time.
Right.
So even if they have joint production and joint marketing as a motive, are you differentiating the multiple motives of a JV or only looking at the marketing aspect?
Right. So when it comes to these joint ventures, so marketing is a must. If you do on top of anything else, that is fine. So all these joint ventures, if you take, so one of the activities that they are focusing on is marketing.
And
Okay.
you're controlling whether they are also manufacturing or doing a joint
So okay,
production.
so other than marketing, are they doing other thing also? I did not control for that. So, but that's a good point. I will do that. Yeah, sure.
Like Godrej,
So-
this Hero Honda is
Yeah,
doing joint
right,
manufacturing.
absolutely.
Maybe, but Hersey's is actually only distribution.
Only distribution,
So
right?
then
Yeah.
what will happen
Mhm.
if they are doing a joint production
Mhm.
and then if they are acquiring,
Mhm.
if you see the performance of the emerging market firm dropping,
Mhm.
that could be explained by the percentage of value creation being made by the firm itself.
Mhm.
So who's creating value and who's appropriating that value
Mhm.
would be reflected in your shareholder.
Kind of dependency that this Indian firm has.
Has on the theory of the technology or
So
not.
if it is just for distribution and if you if the product
And then if you are
is
making off,
non-technical, then
yes,
it doesn't
yes,
matter.
then it
So you
doesn't
can still
matter.
produce probably same quality products, but for Hero Honda, the Hero is essentially dependent on value creation for the.
And actually that will also affect the product emphasis value.
Mhm.
So if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have this
That's part of that
product,
kind
so there
of-
will be kind of
That leads to the product emphasis in nature.
So that was my last point. The second point was in this alliance experience,
Mhm.
you are taking the number of alliances that have been formed.
Right, right.
So, I mean, that is fair enough, but as a robustness check, you may also look at how long that alliance has really progressed. So, if a
Yeah, so I have included, I have control for that, the tenure of the alliance.
tenure of the current alliance, focal alliance.
Yeah,
or the
focal
number
alliance.
of
No,
previous
no,
alliances.
not, yeah, that's a good point, right,
so,
right.
So, suppose if a firm is forming
Makes
only
sense.
2 alliances,
That's-
but they have run
That
for
makes
10
sense.
years.
Right, right, right. So taking a multiplication of how many alliances into each one,
Need
right?
for
So
the
makes sense.
separately
Yes.
also, you could just run a robustness.
Yeah,
check.
that's a
Because
very
the
good
learning
point.
is dependent on the time and on the
Sure.
absorptive capacity of the firm.
Excellent. Yeah.
Also, I think like Renault, like Mahindra, by the time that the JV got dissolved, Mahindra on its own was actually producing quite a good car in the Indian market.
Sure.
Whereas their JV cars were actually performing very badly in the market. So the kind of value that you are delivering, the kind of product that you are delivering back to the market, that might also, the performance that this JV is actually creating, so that might also something that you might want to do.
Yeah, sure. So can you? So I want to pick your brain in this. So if you can help me, so maybe we can talk later. Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
My question was somewhat related to what both of them asked. So I perceive that if we are talking about what is the market share of the emerging market firm in that particular segment,
Mhm.
it kind of creates a, so for example, Hero Honda, let me take that example. So Hero had no presence in motorcycles before Honda came in,
Right.
and Hero was not present in that segment. Its market share was probably quite important.
Sure.
And so when this alliance happens, it's a very clear indicator that the presence of Hero Honda in motorcycles is due to the technical expertise of Honda and not Hero alone. So when Honda goes away, Hero loses well. On the other hand, if we take maybe Britannia, for example, Britannia already has a presence in confectionaries and stuff, and already has a significant market share. And when developed firm
I got your point. Yeah, that I think that's a very
market share in good
So
segment.
the
Yeah.
relative importance of each of these partners
I'll include this. Yeah.
in the value creation process,
Mhm.
that is something that you have relative dependency in the value creation process. The value that they deliver back to the market, to what extent the developing firm is actually dependent on its partner in order to do that. And that will probably also be indicative from their performances. So,
Sure.
So just related to that, so it's not that every emerging market firm is dependent on the developed market firm for technology, like Britannia example or Tata. They on their own they had technology,
Right,
and basically Fiat was more on the downstream side from a Fiat point of view, not
Sure,
from a.
Right,
It's not that. And secondly, is that like I don't know whether it's related, but eventually one of the partners coming out of the joint venture and establishing own business like Honda. So that
Yeah.
has some bearing on the value, because if Honda is going to compete with the joint venture.
So that's a good point. So we got this thing earlier. So we have done a robustness check. Controlling for whether So we found that very few cases were like that. For example, in Hero Honda case, there is one case where Hero acquired the business when Honda actually started it. So there are like, hardly like, 10 cases, okay, out of the 160 thing. But what we did is we controlled for that particular factor that, okay, after this, whether it is doing a competing thing or not. So yeah, the results were kind of pretty much the same. Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, that's a very good point. So earlier this was something it was brought up and we did a robustness check about it. Yeah.
My question is related to a sample of 166 joint ventures. Out of it, can you please reflect what is the sectorial presence of this 106 joint ventures? Like in how these sectorial presence, for example, how many are manufacturing related, how many are related? And have you ever controlled this, which sector
yes,
is
right.
From the...
We control the SIC codes, essentially, right? So we have looked at the...
At any reflection, which sector is performing like well in this context?
Which sector is performing well and also I can... Yeah, sure. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Sure. Maybe I think I should look at the things. So what we have done is like we have looked at industry concentration essentially as a whole because we had like a lot of variables when it comes to it, right? So I mean we didn't have enough degrees of freedom to add a lot of industry. But this is one thing that is missing here. But yeah, we do an analysis. But the issue, only issue is that I have to remove several other things and yeah, include that, right? But sure.
So I'm somewhat new to this type of analysis. So when you do event studies and such type of research, actually we are using a very small window for which the stock performance changes. But over time, maybe the company recovers and it does much better. There are many other things that happen. So what is the actual significance of doing this type of research?
Yeah, this is again, when you do event studies, this is a common criticism essentially. You are just looking at the short-term value effects, etc. But one of the reasons, the hypothesis behind using this short-term event windows and short-term abnormalities is that this is a very good estimate of the future value of the firm and all. However, yeah, so another challenge is that it's very challenging to look at the long-term effects and all, like getting the information on this, and also it's the easiest way to look at it to start with. So that's why. But yeah, this is a kind of a common criticism that we have, like looking at short-term abnormalities as
the long term, too many things change.
Yeah, too many things change, and also, yeah, but that's true. I mean, in some areas, so my advisor Venki Shankar himself, so he has a paper on looking at product returns on product recalls on firm's performance. Earlier they did an event study, short-term abnormalities, but later, subsequently, they collected more data on the long-term effects and all. So they looked at the long-term effects. But it's very interesting that they saw some interesting differences. Okay, that in the short term you may see negative effects, but in the long run those negative effects will be taken care and all. Yeah. So maybe I think if we collect more data, that can be another research. Maybe some PhD student can take it up. Yeah, sure.
So there might also be a possibility that in this joint venture dissolution case, the economy was really under economic shock.
Right.
Some external shock. So how do you take account?
Yeah, so we actually controlled for the emerging market GDP growth rate, etc. Okay, to control for those emerging market conditions.
That's growth rate at the time of this.
At the time of the yeah.
And this future uncertainty is being computed by content analysis, right? Or
Yeah, right.
Or any NLP method that we use.
Yeah, so we have so future uncertainty. We have actually so it's like we did more of a qualitative analysis of the announcements and saw like what reason was mentioned. Yeah, keywords essentially.
By
Yeah.
human coders.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
GDP growth rate I understand, but
Yeah.
for example, let's say there is a trade war going between US and China, so that might also have a very short-term impact when this dissolution.
Yeah, so Yeah, that's a good question. So when, so that's why what we do is in event studies we look at a very short-term window to tease out all those endogenous issues.
Testing is something like industry dynamism or industry coefficients, kind of measures at an industry level rather than at a country level.
Yeah, industry level, we have industry concentration.
Yeah, so,
so
something related to that. I suppose. I mean, if the shock is there, it would be also coming at an industry level, rather than only at a macro level.
Right. So we have one variable, control variable for that, but yeah, I mean, we'll see how else we can actually control for that you're talking about. Yeah. So yeah, I'll go ahead. So. So we earlier there was only one study that looked at the impact of joint venture dissolutions on the performance of the partner firm, but it was at a developed and developed market level. Essentially, the joint venture was formed between two US firms. Okay, so what we did is we have actually created a comparison table between our results and what has been actually done. So earlier, the earlier studies actually said that okay, if one of the partners is acquiring joint venture, it creates positive value. That's in line with the real options view. However, so given the resource differences between developed and emerging market firms, when the emerging market firm is acquiring the joint venture, we found a negative value. And so several other moderators, they were not studied even, so this is a future research opportunity also, even in the context of joint ventures between two developed market firms, there is a potential opportunity. And coming to the key findings and managerial implications, so one of the managerial implications of this study is that what managers can do is that they may acquire a better performing joint venture because acquiring a better performing joint venture creates positive value to the emerging market firm after the dissolution. And also the emerging market firms can consider other collaborative possibilities, okay, to actually improve their alliance experience, because having higher alliance experience helps create positive value if the emerging market firm wants to acquire the joint venture after the dissolution announcement. And emerging market firms also can focus on having higher equity. I mean, if they want to acquire the joint venture in the future, because having higher equity upfront can help you, gain more positive value if you want to. So, and real options view also suggests that if you have higher equity, you have more tendency to acquire the joint venture. So that makes more sense to have higher. So, any questions? Yeah, sure.
Did you notice any differences in the performance due to internal reasons for dissolution and external reasons?
Yeah, so essentially, yeah, that's a good point. So we did a robustness check for that. So in this current model, we have looked at whether future uncertainty versus not. But interestingly, so it can be internal and external. Even in internal also, we have positive versus negative internal reasons, right? So internal reason, one positive internal reason is that we have achieved the objective. That's why we are, dissolving the joint venture. And the negative internal reason is that we have been fighting with each other, so it's not going anywhere. So we want to dissolve. So what we have done is we have done 3 separate robustness checks where internal positive versus internal negative, okay, and one internal versus external. So yeah, that has been actually taken care in another way, right? So any other suggestions, improvements, and
so if you can just briefly, I don't know whether it's 5 minutes. You're talking about your other study, the anti-zero.
Yeah.
Very briefly, what exactly you're doing and.
Yeah, so in this study, this is the consequences study of joint venture dissolutions on the emerging markets firm. And in the other study, I look at essentially the antecedents from a control point of view. So if the developed market firm has higher control on the joint venture, so the joint venture has higher propensity for dissolution. Because, again, according to real options view, the developed market firm wants to have higher control, and they actually, with an idea that, okay, the market seems to be not so uncertain, so we want to actually capture the upbeat potential as soon as possible. So let's enter this market with a higher equity control. And what we also found that if the developed market firm had a prior experience in the Indian market, essentially, right? So they even before this joint venture, they have been doing some business here, okay, and then they have higher control on this. It actually positively moderates this particular relationship. However, we have here what we have done is like whether this joint venture is focusing on only marketing or marketing and manufacturing. So what we understood is that even though if you have higher control, if you are focusing on manufacturing and the marketing altogether, it actually delays the dissolution essentially. So these are, yeah.
It's a whole more holistic partnership.
Right, absolutely. So that's the these three are the.
But why would that delay if you have higher equity as well as you have breadth of scope of the alliance is also wide? Why would you delay dissolution?
Yeah, so the propensity of dissolution is lower. The reason is that, so one thing, that's a very good question. One thing I understood is that many firms after the joint venture formation is announced, they spend a lot of time to do the manufacturing setup, etc. Okay, so that itself is also counted in the alliance tenure.
Yeah. So then, but since I've already invested so much, it's better if I acquire the full, business rather than if after so much of investment I have to share my profit.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that, so if the average alliance length is 4 years for just a distribution alliance, for example, for these alliances the average tends to be a little higher. Yeah, so that's the reason essentially, right? So you spend a lot of time, in coming up with the product itself. So you already spent like 2-3 the product introduction phase essentially, right?
You're creating heavy, assets, manufacturing capacities and all.
Yeah.
It's difficult to, it's not easy to come out of all that investment, isn't that? Given that you've invested and technology deployed, and it's just a distribution arrangement, you can easily walk out.
Yeah.
But when you have a,
So that is also one potential explanation behind that, yeah.
So you are looking at the Indian partner or the foreign partner?
The foreign partner.
So if the foreign partner has to acquire, it would be much easier for me because this is my technology and I've invested so much. For the Indian partner, it would be difficult to dissolve, but for the foreign partner, it might be relatively easier.
Yeah, right.
Subject to Indian partner being, having willingness to do that. I assume that.
Yeah. So the point is, the Indian partner has only marketing-based capability. The foreign partner has technology and also deep pockets. So they've already invested in a plant or machinery. So why not? I should just go and acquire, the whole. So for the foreign partner, it might be easy, but for the Indian partner, it might be difficult.
Right. Yeah. So that makes sense. Yeah. So the potential explanation is that a lot of time is spent in kind of setting up the thing. So that actually delays the kind of design. So for example, the product to right from the conceptualizing to the product launch, there is like a 3 years window in those cases. Maybe that is the reason that's actually right. So but yeah, we can talk about it if you have some ideas. Yeah. So that project essentially, so it's still we are still kind of it's in the final stages to the other one. So that is we are targeting Journal of Marketing Research. This is targeted at Journal of Marketing. So these are the 2 projects, and other project. I mean, if you can share some thoughts on it, is that we are actually looking at reverse brand acquisitions essentially. So these are traditionally, if you look at mergers and acquisitions, the developed market firms acquired several emerging market firms, right, in general. So similar to reverse innovation, what we are calling them is reverse brand acquisition. So like I was talking to Anand today afternoon, Tata Tetley was the largest acquisition to start with about 20 years ago, and then Tata Jaguar. Even in China, Geely acquiring Volvo, and the Lenovo and IBM and all this kind of acquisition. So there is, it seems that there is a trend of these reverse brand acquisitions. So we are calling them reverse brand acquisitions essentially. You can also acquire a manufacturing unit versus a brand, right? So we are more interested because it's again targeted at the Journal of Marketing kind of outlet, right? So that's why we want to look at. So these are essentially reverse acquisitions, right? So what we are trying to look at is that so what are the drivers and the process and the integration, etc. What kind of challenges they have, and what makes the reverse brand acquisition successful for the emerging market firm essentially. For example, Tata acquired Jaguar. If you look at now that in general the automobile firms are facing a lot of challenges, right? And very soon there is a lot of interest in electric cars, etc. Right? So when Tata acquiring Jaguar, they didn't really think about this electric car kind of So right, so yeah.
But is it really a reverse brand acquisition, because Jaguar Land Rover has absolutely no mention in terms of their brand presence about Tata or even Tetley, even the ThinkPads, the IBM aspect. So only last year did they start putting the Lenovo brand on their laptops.
Right.
Till 2017, it was only IBM and ThinkPad. So where is the brand presence over here? It's a normal corporate acquisition so the consumer is not seeing anything. So how is it a reverse brand acquisition?
It's an emerging market firm acquiring a
but
brand of
just
development.
bringing brand, the word brand in it, because there needs to be some sort of consumer-facing aspect. Otherwise, it's just a normal, change of ownership.
I think you have a fair point. Actually, when it comes to Lenovo and IBM, so my definition of brand acquisition is what Anand has mentioned in general. But you have a fair point. Essentially, so what you are saying that are these emerging market firms moving up the value chain by acquiring a developed market brand, right? So are you moving up the value ladder, right? So for example, like in IBM's Lenovo case, etc. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point to look at when we define these constructs, etc. So, but when it comes to IBM and Lenovo, so there are different things that you can do when you are acquiring a brand. Whether you keep it as it is, okay, like in Tata actually gave free hand to Jaguar Land Rover, right? So in some cases what you do is that you jointly promote it, or you kind of completely change the name of the in Lenovo's case. I mean, eventually what they did is like they completely changed it, and now they just made Lenovo laptops, right? So essentially, but desktops, etc. So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, thank you very much. So any other thoughts on this if you want, but we can talk later also after this.
Okay, so I think there are no more questions. So thanks
Thank you.
Dr. Kiran for coming down to Ahmedabad and offline and we can talk.
Sure. Thank you for the invitation once again, and thank you very much for coming for the talk. And thanks for your suggestions. That's the most important thing to improve our work. Yeah, thank you very much.